Nothing is desired to be justified before death. Travelers from after life, slaves of time and space, what else could feel more unreal than the aging youth? Must and shall would rather consummate war and peace. Nobody is out of the whole world within a single hair, holding as if mindfully the prodigal son, who feels the moment he understands hope and fear that all fade in vain, thus there comes another dawn. Nowhere is opposite of where, being in existence, regardless against odds and evens, steals the thief of destiny each impossible allowance. Have we suffered enough from unrequited self? Never is reoccurring between indeed and perhaps, but forever remains as trustful as a fool. Tomorrow does no harm as long as today sleeps. Through yesterday, among many days, only few.
Nothing is desired to be justified before death. Travelers from afterlife, slaves of time and space. What else could feel more unreal than the aging youth? Must and shall would rather consummate war and peace. Nobody is out of the whole world within a single hair, holding as if mindfully the prodigal son, who feels the moment he understands hope and fear. That all fade in vain, thus there comes another dawn. Nowhere is opposite of where, being in existence. Regardless, against odds and evens steals the thief of destiny each impossible allowance. Have we suffered enough from unrequited self? Never is reoccurring between indeed and perhaps, but forever remains as trustful as a fool. Tomorrow does no harm as long as today sleeps through yesterday, among many days only few.
Vastness within that smallness. Also a sense of emptiness, but not in a bad way.
The concept of time.
The journey of figuring yourself out through time and how you're constantly evolving and becoming this something, somebody, somewhere, sometime. So it's this constant nothingness until you've figured yourself out.
When you live, you go through life in different stages, you understand things differently.
Like we were discussing before, I'm trying to read Book of Way at the moment, and that's an English translation one. It kind of reminds me of the messages that each of the poems are kind of pointing out in that sort of possession and longing for the how do you say it? Like modern society is more suffering for the soul. The Western side focuses more on how to live within society that's built and stuff, whereas the Eastern seems to focus more on kind of peace in the soul, so being at one with, I don't know, like nature and the surroundings and stuff.
Nothing is desired to be justified before death. I think that's quite open to interpretation, so lots of different people can have their own meanings. But I think the first paragraph, the whole nothing, is quite a very good opening statement.
Yeah, sets a nice tone for the poem.
Yeah.
Travelers from afterlife, slaves of time and space, because we're all slaves of time and space. Everything happens for a reason, and that reason is physics.
Time is actually the most valuable thing that we have, and it defines us from the past and the future, as well as it mentioned in time and space. It also takes time on the now and what we are surrounded here.
When you say slaves of time and space and unrequited self and all these kind of things, it feels a lot to me about subjective experience, I guess, like this, you know, that there's no absolute scale to measure anything against, only our own subjective experience.
What else could feel more unreal than the aging youth is a bit horrible in a way. It depends how you read it yourself. I've kind of been thinking, even though I'm 27, I'm feeling quite old a lot of the time. So yeah, the unrealness of losing your childhood all the time gets a bit shitty. Have we suffered enough from unrequited self? Kind of the second you put into civilization, you stop living as you kind of should be.
To holding as if mindfully the prodigal son, because
I identify myself as a prodigal son.
Have we suffered enough from our unrequited self? Unrequited self. Requited self. Yeah. That's the question, if we suffered enough.
Never is reoccurring between indeed and perhaps, but forever remains as trustful as a fool. Like sometimes you don't know what decision to make. Yeah, you don't dare to do something.
Tomorrow does no harm as long as today sleeps has a mindful tone to me.
Yeah.
And in that way, maybe a sort of Buddhist tone of that sense of emptiness as well.
Nothing is desired to be justified before death. Travelers from afterlife, slaves of time and space. What else could feel more unreal than the aging youth? Must and shall would rather consummate war and peace. Nobody is out of the world within a single hair, holding as if mindfully the prodigal son, who feels the moment he understands hope and fear, that all fade in vain. Thus, there comes another dawn. Nowhere is opposite of where being in existence, regardless, against odds and evens steals the thief. Of destiny, each impossible allowance, have we suffered enough from unrequited self? Never is reoccurring between indeeds and perhaps, but forever remains as trustful as a fool. Tomorrow does no harm as long as today sleeps. Through yesterday, among many days, only a few.
You have words in capitalized, nothing, nobody, nowhere, never, and that's like the title of the poem. And then you have some words in brackets that is interesting, like you can interpret it like, is it like you're giving it more strength, the things that are in brackets, or maybe you're like hiding that meaning, like maybe sometimes it applies, maybe that word doesn't apply.
A lot of words in brackets which, if you leave them out, suddenly the whole sentence changes. So you can either read travelers from afterlife, slaves of time and space, or you can read travelers from life, slaves of time and space. And I find that really interesting because in that way there's kind of two poems in one.
I like the four different stanzas. It feels very structured to me. Like I feel like a lot of attention has been paid to the structure of the poem, which like gives a lot of shape to the poem. Lots of poems are very sporadic, whereas this is much more structured, which I think helps lend understanding to the poem.
And I also really enjoy the capitalization, like time and space, war and peace, odds and evens, forever, tomorrow, yesterday, today.
Things stand out.
It's really good. You're really putting emphasis on different concepts that might be a bit too far out, but it kind of sets the tone of like being nothing, nobody, nowhere, never. It's abstract whilst relatable.
A good sense of spacing and timing. So the commas and also the use of capitalizations in parts kind of makes you feel like you should stop and then say these words with a bit more power than the others, which gives it a nice sense of meaning, I think.
Pairings of opposites. Odds and evens, tomorrow, today, yesterday, hope and fear, war and peace, must and shall. Must and shall.
Interesting rhymes that is not like the same exact vowels, but consonant, for example, space and peace, and then hair and fear, or sun and dawn. It's not exactly the same vowels, but they share sort of the sound.
So instead of rhyming the whole word, you decided to rhyme the
consonant
different
sounds.
Consonants at the end of the vowels, like death and youth in the first stanza, hair and fear. It kind of
thief
has
and self.
Thief, self, fool and few. It kind of has this, they're the same, but also you're trying to not give into the traditional rhyming scheme. Very good at taking the classic poem, which is about 4 stanzas, 4 lines, like the coupling rhyming scheme of AB, but kind of twisting it a bit, making it a teeny bit more abstract while still following all the rules, but turning them on their heads.
You were holding your left arm over your head in one of the images and your right arm over your head in the other image. 2 images are merging and dissolving, appearing but disappearing.
Concept of humanity around a little bit. And then there's also a double exposure. So in the same way that there's 2 poems, if you think about whether you read the words in brackets or not, in the same way there's 2 people in the picture. So 2 sides of the same thing.
having this duality on the images actually describes what is defined in the poem somehow.
Static image of this person being set in this moment, really figuring out the extremities of his or her or their existence.
And it feels like somebody lost in time and space as well, but at the same time it's almost like a dance. It's quite rhythmic, which I think lends itself to the poem, which is also very rhythmic. And this person is quite genderless, which also I get the vibe from that poem as well. So yeah, they work very well together.
Feeling of emptiness and kind of being outside time and space and escaping from the subject. And
Looks a bit to me like someone losing their mind. So that's a visual representation of an existential crisis.
Like a person who is present in his mind, but he already, or she accepted his faith, because this face looks very hopeless.
Yeah, it is like a puzzle that I haven't figured out. My logical brain likes the structure and the appearance that there's like hidden logic in it, which I haven't understood.